The words hit me like a physical blow across the dinner table. My mother Helen stood up, her voice rising to a shriek that echoed through our family dining room where my uncle, aunt, and cousin sat in stunned silence. "You will never be as successful as your sister, Amanda. Look at you, 32 years old, still doing little art projects from your apartment while she's climbing the corporate ladder." Her finger jabbed toward my chest with each venomous word. I felt my cheeks burn as everyone stared at their plates, uncomfortable witnesses to my public humiliation. When I tried to explain that my freelance graphic design work was actually meaningful, she cut me off with brutal finality. "You are a complete failure, Beth." Something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, my voice shaking but clear. "Then ask Amanda for the $50,000. The room went completely dead silent. The silence stretched endlessly as every pair of eyes locked onto me. My mother's face had drained of all color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Uncle Robert set down his fork with a soft clink that sounded deafening in the quiet room. Aunt Susan reached for her water glass with trembling fingers. My cousin Jenny stopped chewing completely, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization. "What, $50,000? Uncle Robert's voice cut through the tension like a knife. His weathered face showed genuine bewilderment as he looked between my mother and me. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, but there was no going back now. The secret I had carried for 2 agonizing years was finally spilling out. "The money I've been lending, Mom," I said, my voice growing steadier with each word. "Starting 2 years ago when she called me sobbing about losing the house." I turned to face my mother, directly watching her sink back into her chair like a deflating balloon. "Remember that night, Mom? You said the mortgage company was foreclosing and you needed $15,000 immediately, or you'd be homeless by Christmas." My mother's hands fluttered nervously around her coffee cup, her eyes darting everywhere except my face. "Beth, please, this isn't the time or place," she whispered, but her voice lacked any authority. The woman who had just been screaming about my failures suddenly looked small and fragile. "No, I think this is exactly the right time." I pulled out my phone with hands that barely shook anymore. The spreadsheet I had meticulously maintained for 24 months contained every painful detail. I had just landed my biggest client ever that week. A tech startup in Portland needed a complete rebrand, and they were paying me $30,000 for the project. It was supposed to change everything for my business. Aunt Susan leaned forward, her kind eyes filled with concern. "You gave up your big break to help your mother." The sympathy in her voice almost broke my resolve, but I pressed on. "I wired the $15,000 that same night. Mom promised it was temporary just until Amanda got her big promotion and could help out." I scrolled through my phone, showing the bank transfer confirmation from October 14th, 2 years ago. She begged me not to tell Amanda because her job was so stressful, and she didn't want to burden her precious daughter with family problems. Jenny set down her glass of wine entirely, her journalism instincts clearly kicking in. "But it didn't stop there, did it?" she asked quietly. "Oh no, it was just the beginning." I could hear the bitterness creeping into my voice, but I couldn't stop it anymore. 3 weeks later, her car needed emergency repairs, $4,000 for a new transmission. Then her health insurance didn't cover some medical tests in December, another $3,000. Credit card debt from Christmas shopping in January, $6,000 more. Uncle Robert was doing math in his head, his engineering mind automatically calculating totals. "That's already $28,000, Beth. Where did the rest come from?" My mother finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. There were other emergencies. The roof leaked during that bad storm in March. The water heater died in June. Small things that added up. Small things. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. $8,000 for roof repairs that could have waited until summer. $3,000 for a premium water heater when a basic one would have worked fine. $5,000 for new furniture because yours was embarrassing when Amanda visited. And let's not forget the $2,000 you needed for Amanda's birthday party because you wanted to throw her something worthy of her success. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. Every transaction was burned into my memory, along with the guilt trips and tearful phone calls that accompanied each request. I remembered working 16-hour days to make up for the money I kept bleeding to my mother's endless emergencies. Potential clients I had to turn away because I couldn't afford the upfront costs for materials. Business opportunities missed because my savings account was perpetually empty. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I continued, my voice gaining strength. That next month would be different. That Amanda would start helping once she got settled in her new position. But the requests never stopped coming. Every time I tried to say no, Mom would cry about how I was the only one who cared about family, how Amanda was too busy with important things to be bothered with her mother's problems. Cousin Jenny reached across the table and touched my arm gently. "Beth, why didn't you tell us any of us would have listened?" "Because I believed her story too." The admission tasted bitter. I thought Amanda really was this corporate superstar who was too important to deal with family finances. I thought I was doing my duty as the lesser daughter, the one who wasn't destined for greatness, but could at least be useful. I looked directly at my mother, whose tears were now flowing freely. Every month I updated my spreadsheet tracking every penny you promised to pay back when things got better. $53,417 to be exact, not including interest. The dining room felt like a courtroom where I had just presented evidence that condemned everyone's assumptions about our family dynamic. Uncle Robert was staring at his sister with an expression I had never seen before. Aunt Susan looked like she might be sick. Jenny was foraging through her purse for something to write on, her reporter instincts fully engaged. "You kept records of everything?" my mother asked weakly, perhaps hoping for one last escape route. "Every bank transfer, every tearful phone call, every broken promise to pay me back." I scrolled through months of data on my phone. "Would you like me to read the memo lines? Emergency car repair will pay back next month. Medical bills, Amanda getting raised soon. Roof crisis temporary loan. It's all here, Mom. 2 years of your emergencies funded by my success that you just called non-existent." Uncle Robert stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Helen, what have you done?" His voice carried disappointment so deep it seemed to echo off the walls. But I wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened and years of suppressed resentment came pouring out. "And do you know what the worst part is? Every time I struggled to make my rent because I had drained my accounts for you, every time I had to turn down a date because I couldn't afford dinner out, every time I worked until 3 a.m. to make up for lost income, you were telling everyone what a disappointment I was. How Amanda was the daughter with real potential while I was just floating through life without ambition." My mother's sobs were the only sound in the room now, but they felt like validation rather than guilt. For 2 years, I had sacrificed my own financial stability and business growth to support her lifestyle, all while enduring her constant comparisons to my supposedly superior sister. The woman who had just screamed about my failures had built her entire life on my hidden success. "So, yes, Uncle Robert," I said, turning to face him with newfound confidence, "when Mom says I'll never be as successful as Amanda, maybe she should ask Amanda for the money instead. See how that works out." My sister Amanda, who had been sitting frozen in her chair throughout my revelation, suddenly came to life like a marionette whose strings had been yanked. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic that flashed across her face as she realized everyone was now staring at her expectantly. "This is ridiculous," Amanda said, her voice pitched higher than usual as she gestured dismissively with manicured hands. "Beth is clearly exaggerating. You know how she dramatizes everything." But her laugh sounded forced and brittle in the heavy silence that followed. "Am I?" I pulled up my banking app and turned the screen toward Uncle Robert. "Here's the wire transfer from last Tuesday, $3,000 for Mom's emergency dental work. Would you like to see the deposit confirmation, yum?" Amanda stood up abruptly, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she began pacing behind her chair. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you're living in a tiny apartment doing freelance work while I have a real career with a Fortune 500 company. Marketing executive at Pinnacle Solutions." Aunt Susan said, slowly repeating the title Amanda had been proudly announcing at family gatherings for the past year. "That's what you told us, right? 6-figure salary, corner office company car." Amanda's stride faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "That's right. I work in a highly competitive environment where results matter. Not everyone can handle that kind of pressure." She shot a pointed look at me. "Some people are cut out for big corporate success, and others are better suited for small creative projects." But Jenny was watching Amanda with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent years interviewing politicians and spotting inconsistencies. Which Pinnacle Solutions exactly? The consulting firm downtown or the marketing agency in the suburbs? The consulting firm, obviously. Amanda's tone suggested the question was beneath her, but I noticed her hands had started trembling slightly. "We handle major accounts, develop strategic initiatives, manage multi-million-dollar campaigns." I reached for my phone again, but this time I pulled up a different app. "That's interesting, Amanda, because I actually looked up your company last month when Mom mentioned your latest promotion. Pinnacle Solutions Consulting has a staff directory on their website." I scrolled through the professional headshots and job titles displayed on my screen. Funny thing, though, I don't see any marketing executives listed. The color began draining from Amanda's face as she realized where this was heading. "Not everyone is listed on the public directory," she said quickly. "Senior positions require confidentiality for competitive reasons. But they do list administrative assistant positions." I held up my phone so everyone could see the webpage. "Like Amanda Carter, Administrative Assistant Level 2, hired in March of last year." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda stopped pacing entirely, her body going rigid as if she had been turned to stone. Uncle Robert adjusted his glasses and leaned forward to get a better look at my screen. "That must be a different Amanda Carter," she whispered, but her voice lacked any conviction. "Same middle initial. Same college graduation year. Same profile photo from your LinkedIn account." I scrolled down to show her picture smiling back at us from the company website. "Starting salary for Administrative Assistant Level 2 is $31,000 annually according to their HR posting on Indeed." Jenny pulled out her own phone and began typing rapidly. "I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile right now, Amanda. It says Marketing Executive, but your employment verification shows Administrative Assistant." She looked up with raised eyebrows. "When did you plan to update the discrepancy?" Amanda collapsed back into her chair as if her strings had been cut. "You don't understand the corporate world," she said desperately. "Job titles don't always reflect actual responsibilities. I do marketing work even if my official title is different. Like filing expense reports and scheduling meetings." I had done my research thoroughly after stumbling across her real position. "Because that's what Level 2 administrative assistants do at Pinnacle Solutions. I called their HR department and asked about career paths. My mother was looking between Amanda and me with growing horror, as if watching her carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. Amanda, honey, you told me you got promoted to senior marketing executive last month. You said that's why you needed new professional clothes. I do need professional clothes. Amanda's voice cracked with desperation. Image matters in corporate environments. You have to look successful to be successful. Aunt Susan was staring at Amanda with the same expression she might have used to examine a fascinating but dangerous snake. How much did those professional clothes cost, sweetheart? That's not relevant to this conversation. Amanda's attempt at authority fell completely flat. The Nordstrom receipt in your purse says $4,800, Jenny said quietly. During Amanda's pacing, her oversized designer purse had tipped over, spilling its contents across the floor. The receipt lay among scattered makeup credit cards and what appeared to be past due notices. For one shopping trip last weekend. Uncle Robert bent down to help gather the scattered items, his accountant's eye immediately drawn to the financial documents. Amanda, these are all credit card bills, and they're all overdue. He held up statement after statement, each marked with red past due stamps. Capital One Chase Discover American Express. The balances on these add up to more than $60,000. Everyone has credit card debt, Amanda said weakly, but she was no longer meeting anyone's eyes. Not everyone has debt that exceeds their annual salary by 100%. I said, pulling up the salary information I had researched. $31,000 a year minus taxes works out to about $23,000 take-home pay. How exactly were you planning to pay minimum payments on $60,000 in credit card debt? The truth was spreading across Amanda's face like a stain. Every carefully maintained lie was unraveling as Uncle Robert continued examining the financial documents that had scattered from her purse. Bank statements showing overdraft fees, loan applications that had been denied, a lease agreement for the studio apartment she shared with 2 roommates, not the luxury one-bedroom she had described to us. The car, Cousin Jenny said, suddenly looking out the window at the gleaming BMW parked in the driveway. Is that lease too? Amanda buried her face in her hands. The payments are $647 a month, she whispered. My take-home pay is barely enough to cover rent, car, and minimum credit card payments. I haven't bought groceries in 3 weeks. The room fell silent again as everyone processed this information. The sister who had been held up as the standard of success for the past 2 years was revealed to be drowning in debt and barely surviving paycheck to paycheck. Every family dinner where I had been compared unfavorably to Amanda's achievements now felt like a cruel joke. But you've been posting pictures from expensive restaurants, Aunt Susan said gently. Wine Tastings Broadway shows weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. Derek pays for everything when we go out. Amanda's voice was barely audible now. My boyfriend has been covering my lifestyle because I told him I was between paychecks from my executive position. He thinks I'm temporarily cash poor because my money is tied up in investments. Uncle Robert was still examining the credit card statements, his engineering mind calculating the devastating mathematics of Amanda's financial situation. These minimum payments alone would require more than your entire monthly income. How have you been making any payments at all? Amanda looked up at my mother with eyes full of guilt and shame. Mom has been helping with some of the bills. She said family should stick together and that my career was an investment in all our futures. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrible clarity. My mother hadn't just been lying about Amanda's success to make me feel worse about myself. She had been actively funding Amanda's fake lifestyle with money borrowed from me, creating an elaborate financial shell game where I unknowingly supported the very person being used to humiliate me. So, let me understand this correctly. I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I've been giving you $50,000 over 2 years to help with emergencies, while you've been giving that money to Amanda to maintain a lifestyle that supports lies about her success, which you then use to make me feel like a failure. My mother's silence was answer enough. Amanda was crying now, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her cheeks in dark rivulets. I never asked Mom to compare us. I just needed help getting established in my career. Getting established. Jenny was reading through more of the scattered documents. According to this lease agreement, you've been living with roommates for the past 1.5 years. This cell phone bill shows 3 lines, which means you're sharing a family plan to save money. And this grocery store receipt from last week is for $19.37 total. The perfect, successful sister who had been my mother's weapon against my self-esteem was revealed to be a struggling young woman living a complete fiction. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt hollow. 2 years of financial sacrifice had supported not just one family member's irresponsibility, but an entire elaborate lie designed to make me feel inadequate. Amanda, Uncle Robert said gently, what happens when Derek finds out the truth about your financial situation? She looked up with the expression of someone facing a firing squad. He's already starting to ask questions. He wanted to visit my apartment last week, and I had to make up an excuse about construction noise. And he suggested we apply for a joint credit card to earn travel rewards, but I can't qualify for any new credit. The house of cards wasn't just falling down, it had already collapsed, and everyone had been living in the rubble without realizing it. My mother's financial manipulation hadn't just hurt me. It had enabled Amanda to dig herself into a hole so deep that her real life had become impossible to maintain. But I wasn't finished revealing truths yet. The inheritance secret I had discovered was still waiting, and it would change everything. Uncle Robert was still holding Amanda's scattered financial documents when his expression suddenly shifted as if a memory had just surfaced. He set down the credit card statements and looked directly at my mother with narrowed eyes. Helen, this conversation is bringing back something that's been bothering me for months. His voice carried a new edge of suspicion. When Mom died last year and you handled the estate settlement, you said you'd take care of distributing everything to the girls. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Grandma Rose had passed away 13 months ago, and I had been so consumed with grief that I hadn't thought much about estate details. Mom had told me Grandma had very little to leave behind after her medical bills and funeral expenses. What estate? I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I could see my mother's face going pale again. Your grandmother's estate was worth $140,000, Beth. Uncle Robert's voice was quiet but firm. The life insurance policy alone was $90,000, and she had a savings account with another $50,000 that we never knew about, plus her jewelry collection that was appraised at $12,000. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself as the implications crashed over me like a wave. $140,000, I repeated numbly. Aunt Susan was staring at my mother with dawning horror. Helen, you told us the estate barely covered the funeral costs. You said there was nothing left to distribute. There were a lot of expenses, my mother said weakly, but she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Funeral arrangements, outstanding debts, probate fees. The funeral cost $8,000, Uncle Robert said firmly. I have the receipt because I helped you choose the casket. Grandma had no outstanding debts because she paid cash for everything her whole life. And probate fees for an estate that size would be maybe $3,000 maximum. He was doing math again, his engineering precision cutting through lies like a scalpel. That leaves well over $100,000 that should have been split between Beth and Amanda. I felt like I was drowning. Split between us, I never received anything from Grandma's estate. Mom told me there was nothing to inherit. The silence that followed was different from the previous uncomfortable pauses. This felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next words spoken would send someone tumbling into an abyss. Jenny was frantically taking notes on her phone now, her journalist training fully engaged. "Uncle Robert, do you have copies of any estate documents?" "I have everything," he said grimly. "Helen asked me to witness some of the paperwork because she said she wanted family members involved in the process. I have photos of the bank statements, insurance policies, everything." He pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through his photos. "Here's Grandma's final bank statement showing $53,412. The specific amount made my blood run cold. My mother had borrowed $53,417 from me. $5 difference from my grandmother's entire savings account. And here's the life insurance payout confirmation for $90,000 deposited into Helen's account as executor." Uncle Robert's voice was growing harder with each revelation. "Helen, where did this money go?" My mother was crying now, but these weren't the manipulative tears she had used to extract money from me. These were the tears of someone whose deepest secrets had been dragged into the light. Beth's portion went to help Amanda get established in her career. The MBA program was so expensive, and she needed business clothes and a proper apartment for networking. My portion. I stood up so quickly my chair almost toppled backward. "What do you mean, my portion?" "Grandma always intended for Amanda to have extra help because she was the one with real ambition," my mother said desperately. "You were doing fine with your little business, but Amanda needed support to reach her potential." Uncle Robert's face had turned red with anger. "Helen, that's not how estate distribution works. You were the executor, which means you were legally obligated to distribute assets according to Grandma's will or state inheritance law. You can't just decide one granddaughter deserves more than the other." What did Grandma's will actually say?" Aunt Susan asked quietly. "Everything split equally between her two granddaughters," Uncle Robert replied without hesitation. "I was there when she updated it 2 years before she died. She specifically wanted to make sure both girls received the same amount to help them build their adult lives." The betrayal felt like a physical wound in my chest. My own grandmother had left me $70,000 money that could have transformed my business and my life, and my mother had stolen it to fund Amanda's lies. Every month that I had struggled to pay bills, every client I had turned away, because I couldn't afford startup costs, every night I had worked until dawn to make up for money I kept lending to my mother could have been avoided if I had received my rightful inheritance. "Amanda's MBA program," I said slowly, pieces clicking together in my mind. "How much did that cost?" Amanda looked up from her hands with red swollen eyes. $43,000 for the accelerated program. Mom paid it all up front so I could focus on my studies instead of worrying about student loans. "And the apartment deposit and first year's rent for the place you pretended to live alone?" $18,000 for the year, Amanda whispered. It was in a good neighborhood for networking opportunities. The business wardrobe and professional accessories? About $8,000 total. Mom said image was crucial for corporate success. I was calculating in my head, and the numbers were making me sick. So my $70,000 inheritance paid for Amanda's fake successful lifestyle, while you told me Grandma left us nothing. It was an investment in the family's future, my mother said weakly. Amanda was going to make us all proud with her corporate success. By living a lie funded with stolen money. Jenny's voice cut through the air like a whip. How is fraud an investment in anything? Uncle Robert was examining more photos on his phone, his face growing darker by the moment. "Helen, I'm looking at the estate documents you had me witness. Beth never signed the inheritance waiver forms. Her signature on these papers isn't even close to her real handwriting." The room went completely silent as everyone turned to stare at my mother. Forging legal documents was serious crime, not just a family dispute about money. "Let me see those," I demanded, reaching for Uncle Robert's phone. The signature on the estate waiver forms was clearly fake, looking nothing like my actual handwriting. The date showed I had supposedly signed away my inheritance rights just 2 weeks after Grandma's funeral, when I had been too grief-stricken to handle any paperwork. "I never signed these documents," I said, my voice getting stronger as righteous anger replaced shock. "Mom, you forged my signature to steal my inheritance." "You were so upset about Grandma's death," she said desperately. "I thought it would be easier if I just handled everything. You were busy with your business and Amanda needed the help more." "That's not your decision to make." Uncle Robert's engineering precision had given way to pure fury. "You committed fraud, Helen. Identity theft. Possibly several federal crimes." Aunt Susan was holding her head in her hands. "Helen, how could you do this to your own daughter?" But I was still processing the full scope of the betrayal. "The money I've been lending you for the past 2 years," I said slowly, "that was essentially my own inheritance money being loaned back to me." My mother's silence confirmed what I already knew. She had stolen $70,000 from me, spent it on Amanda's fake lifestyle, then borrowed $53,000 from me to cover her own expenses. I had unknowingly been paying interest on my own stolen money. "And let me guess," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "when Amanda's corporate success story fell apart and she couldn't maintain her lifestyle anymore, you needed a new source of funding. So you started the emergency loans from me." The web of lies and financial manipulation was so complex and cruel that I almost had to admire its twisted ingenuity. My mother had managed to steal my inheritance, use it to fund my sister's fake success story, then guilt me into replacing that stolen money with loans based on my supposed inferiority to Amanda's fraudulent achievements. "Beth, I never meant for it to go this far," my mother pleaded. "I just wanted Amanda to have a good start in life." By destroying mine, I pulled up my bank account on my phone and showed the room my current balance. "Do you see this $3,200? That's everything I have left after 2 years of funding your lies. My business checking account has even less. I've been living paycheck to paycheck while you and Amanda spent my inheritance money on a fantasy." Amanda was sobbing again, but this time I felt no sympathy. "I didn't know it was your inheritance money," she cried. "Mom just said she had some savings she wanted to invest in my education." "But you knew you were lying about your job," Jenny pointed out mercilessly. "You knew you were living beyond your means and letting Beth be humiliated at every family gathering while you stayed silent." The family dinner had become a crime scene investigation with evidence of fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse scattered across the table. But I wasn't finished revealing the truth yet. My mother and Amanda had no idea how much I actually knew about their deceptions. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway where Amanda's leased BMW sat next to Uncle Robert's practical Honda. The contrast felt symbolic of everything that had been revealed tonight. When I turned back to face the table, I could feel a new sense of power and confidence flowing through me. "Since we're sharing family financial information tonight," I said, my voice calm and measured, "let me tell you what I've really been doing for the past 2 years while you've been calling me a failure." My mother looked up with red, puffy eyes, perhaps hoping for some way to redeem herself in this conversation. Amanda had stopped crying and was watching me with wary attention. "My freelance graphic design business generated $123,000 in revenue last year." I let that number sink in for a moment before continuing. "After business expenses and taxes, my net income was $97,000. Uncle Robert's eyebrows shot up. Beth, that's excellent income for someone your age. I own my downtown loft outright. I continued enjoying the shock spreading across my mother's face. Bought it cash 2 years ago with earnings from that tech startup contract. My car is paid off. I have no credit card debt, no student loans, no outstanding obligations of any kind. Jenny was staring at me with newfound respect. Wait, you own property in downtown Portland. Do you know what those lofts are worth now? Mine was appraised last month at $430,000, I replied. I needed the appraisal for insurance purposes after I expanded my home office. Aunt Susan was calculating in her head. Beth, if you're debt-free with that income level, you should have substantial savings. Where's all your money going? I gestured toward my mother. $53,000 went to family emergencies, but I've still managed to build an investment portfolio worth $218,000. Mostly index funds and a small position in the tech startup whose brand I redesigned. The silence that followed was different from the previous shocked pauses. This felt like everyone was recalibrating their understanding of our family dynamics. The daughter who had been dismissed as an underachiever was revealed to be more financially successful than anyone had imagined. But you drive that old Honda, my mother said weakly, as if grasping for evidence that I was still the failure she had portrayed me as. It's a 2019 model that I bought new, I corrected. I chose it because it's reliable and efficient, not because I can't afford something nicer. I prefer to spend money on things that matter, like building my business and helping family members who claim to be in crisis. Amanda was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You've been successful this whole time. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because every time I mentioned a client or a project, Mom would dismiss it as playing with computers or doing little art projects. I had spent years downplaying my achievements to avoid this exact conversation. And because every time I tried to share good news, it was immediately followed by comparisons to your supposed corporate success. Uncle Robert was shaking his head in amazement. Beth, you've been supporting your mother financially while building a 6-figure business and accumulating substantial wealth. That's remarkable for someone in their early 30s. There's more, I said, pulling up my email app. I've been deliberately hiding my success from this family for good reason. Mom, remember when I lost that big contract with Sarah Martinez's nonprofit last year, the $25,000 project that would have been perfect for my portfolio? My mother's face went white. You said they found someone else. They did find someone else, but only after Sarah called to verify my references, and you told her I was unreliable and struggling financially. I showed the table my email correspondence with Sarah. She was concerned about hiring someone who might not be stable enough to complete a major project. Your sabotage cost me a contract that would have led to 3 more nonprofit clients. The betrayal in that email exchange still stung. Sarah Martinez had been excited about working with me until she spoke with my mother, who apparently felt compelled to share her opinions about my career prospects with potential clients. Jenny leaned forward to read the email chain over my shoulder. Your own mother sabotaged your business relationships. It gets worse. I continued scrolling through my saved emails. Mom, you remember my business partner Jake Chen, right? The nice young man who came to Christmas dinner 2 years ago, Aunt Susan said. Jake has been urging me to cut financial ties with family for 18 months because he could see how the constant money requests were affecting my business growth. He offered to help me set up a formal business loan structure if family members needed financial assistance with proper contracts and payment schedules. I found the email thread I was looking for and began reading aloud. Here's what I told Jake after Mom's last emergency loan request. I know you're right about the family situation, but I can't abandon my mother when she's struggling. Maybe after Amanda gets established in her career, things will improve. Uncle Robert winced. You turned down professional financial advice to keep supporting someone who was actively undermining you. Jake's response was prophetic. I continued reading. He wrote, Beth, successful people don't constantly have financial emergencies. Either your mother is terrible with money management, or she's not being honest about her situation. Either way, you're enabling behavior that's harmful to both of you. The accuracy of Jake's assessment was painful to acknowledge now. My business partner had seen through my mother's manipulation from the beginning, but I had been too emotionally invested to listen. There's something else you don't know about my supposed failure of a career, I said, switching to my professional email account. I've been accepted to speak at 3 national design conferences next year. The topics are sustainable branding for small businesses, financial independence for creative professionals, and building client relationships in competitive markets. Amanda looked like she might faint. You're speaking at conferences. The Design Excellence Conference in Chicago, the National Small Business Summit in Denver, and the Creative Entrepreneurs Workshop in Seattle. I scrolled through the speaker confirmation emails. The Chicago conference is paying me $8,000 plus expenses for a 2-day workshop series. Aunt Susan was beaming with pride. Beth, that's incredible recognition for your expertise. My work was also featured in Design Today magazine last month. I continued pulling up the digital magazine on my tablet. 3-page article about innovative approaches to startup branding featuring my logo design for that tech company in Portland. I handed the tablet to Uncle Robert, who examined the magazine article with growing amazement. The feature included photos of my home office, quotes about my design philosophy, and examples of my work for major clients. You're being featured in national publications, my mother asked weakly. This is the part that really shows how wrong you've been about my success, I said, taking back the tablet and opening my business calendar. I currently have contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies for ongoing brand consultation. My client roster includes 2 major nonprofits, 4 tech startups, and a chain of sustainable restaurants that's expanding nationally. I showed them my upcoming project schedule with client meetings deadlines and payment schedules mapped out through the end of next year. The sheer volume of work and the size of the contracts painted a picture of a thriving business that bore no resemblance to the struggling freelance operation my mother had described to everyone. Next month, I'm starting a year-long contract with Meridian Consulting to redesign their entire brand identity across 14 office locations. I continued. The project value is $157,000 paid in monthly installments. Jenny was frantically taking notes. Beth, you're describing a level of professional success that most people work decades to achieve. And I built it while constantly hemorrhaging money to fake family emergencies. I felt a surge of pride mixed with anger. Imagine what I could have accomplished if I hadn't been supporting someone else's lies for the past 2 years. Uncle Robert set down the tablet and looked directly at my mother. Helen, your daughter is a successful entrepreneur who owns property, has substantial savings, and works with major corporate clients. She's been supporting you financially while you publicly humiliated her for being unsuccessful. Do you understand how twisted that is? But I had one more revelation that would complete the picture of just how thoroughly my family had misunderstood my life. Oh, and Mom, I said, saving the best for last. Remember how you always worry that I'll end up alone because I'm too focused on my little business to find a real relationship? She nodded weakly. I've been dating someone for 8 months. Derek Thompson is a financial advisor who manages investment portfolios for small business owners. I pulled up a photo on my phone showing Derek and me at a wine tasting event. He's helping me plan for early retirement through strategic investments and business growth. We're looking at houses together because my loft is getting too small for both of our home offices. The revelation that I had a serious relationship seemed to be the final straw for my mother's version of reality. Every assumption she had made about my life, every comparison she had used to make me feel inferior, every justification she had created for her financial manipulation was proving to be completely false. "Derek knows about your business success," Amanda asked quietly. "He's the one who convinced me to start tracking all the family loans in a proper spreadsheet," I replied. He said, if I was going to act as a bank for relatives, I needed to document everything like a real financial institution. That's why I have records of every transaction. Uncle Robert was slowly shaking his head. "Beth, you've been living a completely successful life while letting your family believe you were struggling. Why?" The answer to that question would reveal the final layer of deception that had shaped our family dynamics for years. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to reveal would change our family permanently. "Uncle Robert, the reason I've been documenting everything so carefully is because I've been working with an attorney for the past 6 months." The words fell into the room like a bomb. My mother's face went completely white, and Amanda looked like she might be sick. "An attorney?" Aunt Susan asked carefully. "Patricia Williams from Williams & Associates downtown. She specializes in financial fraud and family law." I pulled up my phone and showed them my attorney's business card stored in my contacts. Derek recommended her when I told him about the family loan situation and the inheritance discrepancy. Uncle Robert leaned forward with intense interest. "What kind of legal issues are we talking about, Beth?" "Let's start with the inheritance fraud," I said, my voice taking on a businesslike tone. "Patricia reviewed all the estate documents that you photographed, Uncle Robert. She confirmed that my mother violated her fiduciary duty as executor by distributing assets unequally without proper legal authority." My mother was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. "Beth, surely we can work this out within the family." Patricia also examined the forged signature on my inheritance waiver. I continued ignoring my mother's plea. "She's prepared to file both civil and criminal complaints regarding identity theft and document fraud. The penalties for forging estate documents can include substantial jail time." Jenny's journalistic training was fully engaged now. "What kind of jail time are we talking about?" "Identity theft in Oregon carries a potential sentence of 5 years and up to $125,000 in fines." I replied, reading from notes I had taken during my legal consultations. "Document fraud adds another potential 3 years. And since this involved an estate worth more than $100,000, it qualifies as a felony." Amanda was crying again, but these were tears of panic rather than self-pity. "Beth, please, I didn't know Mom had forged your signature. I thought you had agreed to let me have the inheritance money." "That brings us to the second major legal issue," I said, turning to face Amanda directly. "Patricia discovered something interesting when she ran a credit check as part of her investigation." I pulled up a document on my tablet and showed it to the table. "Mom, you opened a credit card in my name 2 years ago, Capital One with a $15,000 limit. You've been making minimum payments, but the current balance is $12,300. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Uncle Robert, who had been steadily supportive throughout the evening, looked genuinely shocked. "Identity theft for credit fraud carries additional penalties beyond the inheritance issues," I continued. "Patricia has documentation showing that you used my personal information, including my social security number and employment history, to obtain credit in my name." My mother was sobbing now, but I felt nothing but cold anger. "I discovered this when Derek and I applied for a joint mortgage pre-approval last month. The credit card showed up on my report and I had no idea it existed." Aunt Susan covered her mouth with both hands. "Helen, you could have destroyed Beth's credit rating and her ability to buy a house with her boyfriend." "Patricia has already contacted Capital One to report the fraudulent account," I said. They're conducting their own investigation, and they've agreed to remove the debt from my credit report once the fraud is confirmed. But Mom, you're now liable for the full balance, plus any legal penalties Capital One decides to pursue. Uncle Robert was calculating again, his engineering mind totaling up the legal exposure. Helen, between the inheritance fraud, identity theft, and credit fraud, you're potentially facing felony charges on multiple counts. There's more, I said, my voice steady and controlled. Patricia also reviewed all my financial records for the family loans over the past 2 years. She identified a pattern of financial manipulation that qualifies as what's called affinity fraud because it exploits family relationships. Jenny looked up from her notes. What does affinity fraud mean legally? It means using family connections and emotional manipulation to obtain money under false pretenses, I replied. Every emergency loan Mom requested was based on lies about her financial situation and Amanda's ability to help. Patricia considers this systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents. I scrolled through my legal documents to find the analysis Patricia had prepared. Mom, you told me you needed emergency money because Amanda couldn't help due to her demanding job. But Amanda was actually struggling financially and receiving money from you during this same period. That's textbook fraudulent misrepresentation. My mother finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. I was trying to help both my daughters succeed. By stealing from one to fund the other's lies, I pulled up Patricia's case summary. Mom, you've taken approximately $123,000 from me over the past 2 years, $70,000 in stolen inheritance plus $53,000 in fraudulent loans. Patricia believes we can recover not just the principal amount, but also punitive damages for emotional distress. Amanda looked terrified. What does this mean for me? I didn't know about the inheritance theft or the credit card fraud. You're not criminally liable for crimes you didn't commit, I replied. But you did receive money that you knew came from family sources, while allowing me to be humiliated based on lies about your success. Patricia says you could be required to return any money you can't prove you legitimately needed. I turned back to my mother, who looked like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. Mom, Patricia's investigation also uncovered some interesting details about your financial management. Your mortgage payment is only $850 a month on a house that's nearly paid off. Your monthly expenses, including utilities and insurance, total less than $1,500. On your Social Security income of $2,200 monthly, you should have a surplus of $700 every month. Uncle Robert was following the mathematics with growing anger. Helen, if your monthly income exceeds your expenses, why did you need emergency loans from Beth? Patricia found the answer to that question, I said, pulling up bank statements that my attorney had obtained through legal discovery procedures. Mom, you've been withdrawing between $1,000 and $1,500 in cash every month for the past 2 years. The ATM withdrawals show no clear pattern or purpose. The bank statements painted a picture of someone systematically draining their accounts through cash withdrawals while claiming financial emergencies to family members. Patricia believes you've been using my loan money to fund a lifestyle beyond your actual means, I continued. The cash withdrawals started the same month I began lending you money, and they've continued consistently regardless of your claimed financial emergencies. Aunt Susan was staring at the bank statements with horror. Helen, what were you spending $1,500 a month in cash on? But I wasn't finished detailing the legal consequences my mother would face. Patricia has prepared a comprehensive civil lawsuit seeking recovery of all funds, plus interest plus punitive damages for emotional distress. The total claim amount is over $200,000. My mother's house, her car, her retirement accounts, everything she owned could potentially be seized to satisfy a judgment of that size. She's also prepared the criminal complaints for the district attorney's office, I added. identity theft, document fraud, elder financial abuse of her own mother's estate, and systematic affinity fraud. Patricia believes the case is strong enough that prosecutors will likely accept the charges. Uncle Robert was looking at his sister with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Helen, do you understand that you could go to prison for this? But there's one more thing, I said, saving the most damaging revelation for last. Patricia's investigation found that Mom didn't just steal from me and lie to the family. Uncle Robert, she borrowed money from you too, didn't she? Uncle Robert's face darkened. $3,000 last spring for Beth's supposed medical emergency. Helen said Beth was too proud to ask for help directly. The scope of my mother's deception was even broader than I had realized. She hadn't just manipulated me. She had been systematically lying to multiple family members using my name and reputation to extract money from them as well. Patricia wants to interview all family members who may have been defrauded, I said. Uncle Robert, if you were tricked into giving money based on lies about my situation, you could be included in the civil lawsuit as an additional victim. The legal net was closing around my mother from multiple directions. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, credit fraud investigations, and now the possibility that other family members had also been victimized by her systematic deception. But the most satisfying part of this legal revelation was still coming. My mother had no idea that her actions had been so thoroughly documented and that the evidence against her was overwhelming. Mom, I said, looking directly at her tear-stained face, Patricia has also prepared a settlement proposal if you want to avoid criminal prosecution and public litigation. My mother looked up with desperate hope in her eyes, as if the mention of a settlement proposal offered her a lifeline in the legal disaster that was engulfing her. What kind of settlement? She asked weakly. But before I could answer, Uncle Robert cleared his throat and spoke in a voice I had never heard him use before. Before we discuss any settlements, I need to say something that's been eating at me for years. He stood up and began pacing behind his chair, his hands clasped behind his back the way he did when he was working through a complex engineering problem. Helen, everyone at this table except you and Amanda has known for a long time that something was seriously wrong with your version of family events. Aunt Susan nodded grimly. We've been talking among ourselves for 2 years trying to decide if we should intervene. I felt a chill of realization. You knew Mom was lying about things. Beth, honey, we've watched you for years, Aunt Susan said gently. Every family gathering you'd arrive in nice clothes, driving a reliable car, talking intelligently about your work. But Helen would spend the entire evening talking about how worried she was about your future and how successful Amanda was in comparison. Uncle Robert stopped pacing and turned to face the table. The math never added up. Amanda would post pictures from expensive restaurants and vacation trips, but she never seemed to have any actual details about her supposed high-level job. And Beth, you always seemed financially stable, but your mother constantly talked about your struggles. Jenny leaned forward with interest. You suspected the stories weren't true? More than suspected, Uncle Robert replied. I knew Amanda's supposed corporate success was largely fictional because my engineering firm occasionally works with Pinnacle Solutions. I asked my contact there about Amanda Carter in their marketing department, and he'd never heard of her. The revelation that Uncle Robert had been quietly fact-checking Amanda's claims for months made my face burn with embarrassment. Our entire family had been living with obvious lies that the adults had recognized but chosen not to address. Why didn't anyone say anything? I asked. Aunt Susan sighed deeply. Because we hoped you'd figure it out eventually, and we didn't want to destroy family relationships based on suspicions. But watching you be humiliated tonight while supporting your mother financially was too much to bear silently. Uncle Robert sat back down and looked directly at my mother. Helen, I know exactly when you started lying about the girls' situations because I keep detailed family notes for tax and estate planning purposes. 2 years and 3 months ago, you started talking about Amanda's promotion and Beth's financial struggles. That timing corresponds exactly with when Mom died and you handled her estate. The precision of his timeline made it clear that Uncle Robert had been building a case against my mother for months, just like my attorney had been doing from a legal perspective. I also know you lied to me about borrowing money for Beth's medical emergency, he continued, because I called Beth directly the next week to ask how she was feeling, and she had no idea what I was talking about. My mouth fell open. You called me about a medical emergency. You sounded completely healthy and confused when I asked about your hospital stay, Uncle Robert replied. That's when I realized Helen was using your name to extract money from family members. I started documenting everything after that. Jenny was writing furiously in her notebook. Uncle Robert, do you have records of other instances where Mom used Beth's name inappropriately? Several, he replied grimly. Helen told the Hendersons next door that Beth was struggling financially and might need to move back home. She told Pastor Williams at church that she was worried about Beth's ability to support herself long term. She even told my business partner that Beth might be interested in doing some graphic design work for below market rates because she needed the money desperately. Each revelation felt like another betrayal. My mother hadn't just been stealing money from me and lying to our immediate family. She had been systematically damaging my reputation throughout our entire community. The below-market design work comment cost Beth a potential client, Uncle Robert continued. My partner mentioned to a nonprofit board member that he knew someone who might do their logo design cheaply, and when they contacted Beth, they offered her an insultingly low fee because they thought she was desperate for work. Aunt Susan was shaking her head in disgust. Helen, you've been sabotaging Beth's professional reputation while taking her money and calling her a failure. How could you justify that to yourself? But Uncle Robert wasn't finished revealing the extent of family knowledge about my mother's deceptions. There's something else everyone needs to know. Helen, 6 months ago, you asked me to co-sign a loan for Amanda's car. You said Amanda's credit wasn't established yet because she was young, but her income could support the payments. Amanda looked up sharply. You asked Uncle Robert to co-sign my car loan. I refused, Uncle Robert said firmly, because I checked Amanda's employment verification myself. Pinnacle Solutions confirmed she was an administrative assistant, making $31,000 annually, not a marketing executive making 6 figures. I knew you were lying about her income, which meant you were probably lying about her ability to make car payments. The systematic fact-checking that my uncle had been conducting made it clear that our family's adults had been living with the knowledge of these lies for months, trying to decide how to respond without destroying relationships entirely. That's when I started talking to other family members about our concerns, Uncle Robert continued. We've been having monthly phone calls trying to decide if we should stage some kind of intervention. Cousin Jenny looked up from her notes. The family phone calls where you discuss Mom's behavior. Every month for 6 months, Aunt Susan confirmed. We've been documenting instances of financial manipulation, reputation damage, and emotional abuse. We were planning to approach Beth after the holidays to share what we'd discovered. The knowledge that my extended family had been watching my mother's abuse and building their own case against her behavior was both validating and heartbreaking. They had cared enough to investigate and document, but I had suffered through 2 years of manipulation while they debated how to intervene. We also decided unanimously 6 months ago that we would support Beth completely if she ever decided to take legal action against Helen's financial manipulation, Uncle Robert said, looking directly at me. We've all agreed to testify in any legal proceedings, provide documentation of Helen's lies, and cut off financial or emotional support for Helen until she makes full restitution to Beth. The unified family support I had craved for years was suddenly powerfully present, but only after I had already taken legal action to protect myself. "Uncle Robert," I said carefully, "are you saying the entire extended family has been aware of Mom's manipulation and is prepared to support me against her?" We're saying that Helen's behavior toward you has been unacceptable for years, and we regret not speaking up sooner," he replied firmly. "We're also saying that we will not continue enabling her lies and financial abuse by maintaining normal family relationships while she destroys your life." Aunt Susan nodded emphatically. "Helen, you are not welcome at family gatherings until you make complete restitution to Beth and Amanda for the money you've stolen and the relationships you've damaged through lies." The formal disinvitation from family events was clearly something they had discussed and agreed upon in advance. My mother was being systematically isolated by every family member whose opinion she had ever valued. "Amanda," Jenny said, turning to address my sister directly, "what's your position in all of this? Are you going to continue supporting Mom's version of events, or are you ready to acknowledge the truth?" Amanda looked around the table at every face staring at her expectantly. The family members who had always praised her success were now waiting to see if she would align herself with honesty or continue supporting lies that had hurt everyone involved. "I never wanted Beth to be hurt," Amanda said quietly. "I just wanted to succeed, and when Mom offered to help with school and living expenses, I didn't ask too many questions about where the money was coming from." "But you did let Beth be humiliated at every family gathering while you stayed silent about your real situation," Uncle Robert pointed out. "Even tonight you tried to defend lies about your job and lifestyle until you were confronted with evidence." Amanda was crying again, but this time her tears looked like genuine remorse rather than self-pity. "I was ashamed of my real life. I thought if I could just maintain the successful image long enough, I could eventually make it true. By letting your sister suffer," Aunt Susan's voice was gentle but firm, "Beth has been supporting your mother financially while being told she was a failure compared to your fake success. How do you think that affected her self-esteem and mental health?" The question hung in the air as Amanda seemed to realize for the first time how her choices had impacted me emotionally, not just financially. "I want to make this right," Amanda said, looking directly at me with red, swollen eyes. "I don't know how, but I want to fix what we've done to you." Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair. "The first step would be complete honesty about everything, followed by whatever restitution is legally and morally appropriate." But I still had one more revelation that would determine whether any family reconciliation was possible. The settlement proposal from my attorney would test whether my mother and Amanda were truly ready to acknowledge the harm they had caused. 3 months later, I stood in my expanded downtown loft looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that had been installed as part of my recent renovation. The morning light streamed across my new design studio where 2 employees were already working at their stations on projects for our growing client roster. The legal settlement had been finalized 6 weeks earlier. My mother had agreed to plead guilty to identity theft and document fraud in exchange for 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and complete financial restitution. The civil settlement required her to pay me $87,000, representing my stolen inheritance plus interest, and documented damages from the fraudulent loans. Her house had been sold to satisfy the judgment, and she was now living in a modest apartment across town, working part-time at a grocery store to supplement her Social Security income. We had no contact except through our attorneys, and I intended to keep it that way indefinitely. Amanda had voluntarily entered financial counseling and was working with a nonprofit debt consolidation service to address her credit card obligations. She had moved back in with roommates in a more affordable apartment and was taking night classes to improve her job skills. We exchanged brief emails occasionally, but our relationship would need years of rebuilding before anything resembling trust could be restored. The family dynamics had shifted permanently in my favor. Uncle Robert had become my most enthusiastic supporter, regularly referring clients to my expanding business and serving as an informal mentor for major financial decisions. Aunt Susan hosted monthly family dinners at her house, where I was always the guest of honor rather than the target of criticism. Cousin Jenny was writing a freelance article about family financial abuse that would feature my story as a case study in successful recovery. My business had flourished beyond my wildest expectations once I was no longer hemorrhaging money to fake emergencies. The Meridian consulting contract had led to 3 additional corporate clients, and my annual revenue was projected to exceed $200,000. I had hired Sarah Martinez as my business manager after we rekindled our professional relationship, and she was helping me plan an expansion into sustainable design consulting. The speaking engagements at national conferences had established me as a recognized expert in small business branding. The Chicago conference presentation had generated 5 new clients and an invitation to write a monthly column for Design Today magazine. My article series about financial independence for creative professionals was being published as a book by a major business publisher next year. Derek and I had bought a beautiful house in the Pearl District with a dedicated office space for each of our businesses. Our relationship had deepened as I learned to trust someone who supported my success instead of undermining it. We were planning an engagement party for the spring, where Uncle Robert would serve as my official family representative, and Aunt Susan would host the celebration. The vacation cabin I had purchased with my recovered inheritance money had become a creative retreat where I developed new design concepts and hosted weekend workshops for other freelance professionals. The property was already appreciating in value and generating rental income when I wasn't using it personally. I had also established the Rose Henderson Memorial Scholarship at Portland Community College, named after my grandmother, and funded with $10,000 annually to support graphic design students from low-income families. The scholarship recipients worked as interns in my studio, gaining real-world experience while earning money for their education. My therapy sessions with Dr. Rachel Stone had helped me recognize the manipulation patterns I had accepted for years and develop healthy boundaries for all my relationships. I could now identify emotional manipulation within minutes and respond with clear, confident refusal instead of guilt and compliance. The community reputation that my mother had tried to damage was stronger than ever. Pastor Williams had asked me to design new branding for the church's community outreach programs. The Hendersons next door had commissioned me to create marketing materials for their small business. My mother's lies about my financial struggles had been replaced by visible evidence of my professional success. Most importantly, I had learned to value my own judgment about my life and accomplishments instead of seeking validation from family members who had their own agendas. The daughter who had been called a failure was now confidently building an empire based on authentic success rather than borrowed money and false promises. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Client meeting went great. They want to hire us for a complete financial planning and brand redesign package. Dinner tonight to celebrate." I smiled as I typed back, "Perfect. I'll make reservations at that new place downtown." The life I was living now would have been impossible if I had continued enabling my mother's manipulation and accepting her version of my worth. The legal action that had seemed so drastic and painful had actually been the key to unlocking my real potential. As I watched my employees collaborating on a logo design for a sustainable fashion startup, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from the wreckage of my family relationships. Real success creates opportunities for others rather than requiring them to diminish themselves. Authentic love supports growth rather than demanding sacrifice. And sometimes protecting yourself from toxic relationships, even with blood relatives, is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. My grandmother's inheritance money was finally being used the way she had intended when she wrote her will. Instead of funding lies and manipulation, it was building a foundation for genuine achievement and financial independence. The granddaughter, who had been written off as unsuccessful, was honoring Rose Henderson's memory by creating something meaningful and lasting. The family dinner where my mother had screamed about my failures now seemed like a distant nightmare, replaced by monthly celebrations where my extended family praised my accomplishments and supported my continuing growth. Uncle Robert had framed the Design Today magazine article featuring my work and hung it in his office, telling anyone who would listen about his successful entrepreneur niece. But the most satisfying vindication was the quiet confidence I felt every morning when I walked into my thriving studio. No one could take away the business I had built, the clients who valued my work, or the financial security I had created through my own talents and effort. The woman who had been dismissed as a failure was now teaching other creative professionals how to build sustainable, profitable businesses. The truth had set me free in ways I had never imagined possible, and every day that freedom grew stronger. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from financial or emotional manipulation? How do you think you would have handled discovering that your own inheritance had been stolen to fund someone else's lies? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages anyone facing similar family dynamics to trust their instincts and seek the support they deserve. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to stay updated on future content, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of setting boundaries with toxic family members. Remember, your success doesn't require anyone else's permission, and protecting your well-being is always worth the temporary discomfort of confronting difficult truths.